Bill?
The strings attached by the federal government come at the expense of our children. They have, I know when my child was in school, the profiles of learning, very detrimental to them. And I think the government's, interference is actually dumbing down the education system. And I think, so why should we take the money that's going to affect our children's future? Because you got to remember, you and I as business owners out there and as families, these children are the entrepreneurs of the future. These are the children who are going to come up with the inventions and are going to make our life better. And they're the ones who are going to make the money, and they're the ones who are going to raise families, and they're going to have their own businesses. We got to make sure they get a good quality education with no strings attached.
Leslie?
Well, you can't trust the federal government. They double-crossed us on the money for special education. They still, if you can call about owing us money, they still owe us money for special education. So when you make a deal with the devil, he's going to come to collect one of these days. So I wouldn't make any deals with the federal government and only let them do and affect us in ways that are constitutionally required. Today there are terrific opportunities for Minnesota to move ahead on our own in education. With homeschooling, some of the brightest kids I see around are the product of a lot of homeschooling, and I'm really pleased with them. And there's internet schooling, but the most critical thing is the proper placement of children in schools, and that's kind of really an issue near and dear to my heart. Maybe they're just not capable of algebra and physics and biology and things like that, so then they just suffer and drag along. So if we had proper placement in Minnesota and complete control and management of our schools and education as we're required to do, I think we'd do very well. And the answer to the question is, I would not take federal money for education.
Leslie, this doesn't count as a question, it's just a point of personal privilege. Where are you from originally?
Brooklyn, New York.
I thought so. For a Scandinavian kid from Minnesota, you said double-crossed. I felt like I was watching a movie with Clark Gable. It was great.
Thanks for the compliment.
It is. Wonderful. Anyway, Tom, go ahead.
Well, I think everybody's pretty consistent with the answer, but I think it goes a little farther than that. It wasn't just about education. It's about the concept of states' rights versus federal, the federal government taking those rights. I've offered bills, the Minnesota Firearms Freedom Act, which would allow Minnesotans who manufacture guns and ammunition in the state of Minnesota and sell them to Minnesotans and possess them in Minnesota to not have to comply with federal registration requirements. I've offered the Healthcare Freedom Act, which would amend the Minnesota state constitution so that you and I would always have the right to choose our own doctor, our own health care, and pay for it if we chose. I think really the issue, though, Dave, and for everybody else, is this is going to have to come from the governor's office, because I think there's a movement that's coming across this country that looks at this issue and says, for instance, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, you saw about 4 weeks ago, they were crowing about getting $11 billion for more police and fire. Well, that's great, because we all believe in safe communities. The problem is there was a hook on it. It said that you hire some 77 police officers, you keep them on for 3 years, and when the money runs out, guess what? You have to keep them on for another year. That's not responsible. That steals from my children and my grandchildren. If that's the situation, you can't take that money. That's what you got to be looking at. When it comes to education, it clearly isn't helping our children if you look at the numbers that are coming out.
Pat, what are you willing to turn down federal education money, and specifically in what program? I guess that follow-up is almost becoming irrelevant because most people are saying virtually all programs. But okay.
Absolutely. There actually is a study. It was done by the Cato Institute that shows that of the No Child Left Behind dollars, I think it's about 2/3 or more are we actually spend that in administrative costs complying with the federal government. So it is not a net positive to begin with, if you want to just purely look at it from a dollars issue within schools. And I think there is there's a bipartisan group within the legislature, and I think that is opposed to this. It includes Democrats, it includes a lot of teachers. It's bad, and why we would ever let the federal government get involved in our education. I guess I'm a little older than Marty, but I remember when we were talking about abolishing the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education. That's in our platform. And that we've got to get that done. And over the last 10 years, and I'm going to blame Bush for a lot of this, but the federal government has so absolutely overreached into issues that the states should be involved in, or in the case of education, that is a local issue. And the state legislature has mandates almost everything on local school districts right now. So the state legislature is doing the same thing that the federal government is doing within our schools. We've got to get back where the dollars are following students. We have to support homeschools. We have to support private schools, charter schools, choice within public schools, whatever works for the individual kid. So thanks.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I think that it's absolutely critical because even we sometimes forget there is no such thing as federal money. It's your money. It's your money. And so the unfortunate thing, however, is that you send your money to Washington, and as Pat was just saying, they have completely overstepped their role, their responsibilities defined by the Constitution. And so it is going to take leaders at the states who are willing to stand up and say, we're frustrated as heck that you're forcing us to send you our money. But you know what? We don't want it back. I encourage you all, this is my shameless plug for my website, kohlsforgovernor.com. I have a speech that I gave on the floor this year supporting opting out of No Child Left Behind. I talked specifically in that floor speech about the challenge or the reality that we are saying no to getting $230 million of your money back into the state of Minnesota if we do that. However, I think it's absolutely clear to me that what's good for a kid here in Minnesota isn't necessarily the same thing as what's good for a kid in Florida or Tennessee or Alaska. What's good for a kid here in Chaska isn't necessarily the same thing as what's good for a kid in Cloquet or Worthington or Winona. We need to return education decisions to the local level. We need to get parents more involved. And we need to be willing to say no to getting your dollars back from the federal government if we want to succeed in doing that.
Mike, you get the last word on this one.
Well, it'd be hard to find anything that wasn't said, I guess, and I'll start by saying as a senator, I was the first senator to author a bill to opt out of No Child Left Behind. At that time, it would have been a net zero to the state of Minnesota. Anything that we would have given back, we would have saved that much. Pat brought up the fact that for each program the federal government gives us, they require administration, and they only give us about 40 cents on the dollar of what it costs. We can get teachers back in the classroom if we opt out. We can actually let school districts get back to doing what they do. You know, school boards are elected. Let's let them be responsible for getting the job done in those schools so they quit whining and blaming the state legislature. Let's make them do their job. Let's get back control all the way back to the local level. We can figure out in our counties and our cities what our kids need. And Paul said it. It's different all the way around the country. Each of our areas, each of our regions need different educational opportunities. And the federal government took it over. Dave probably knows this better than me, but I believe in 1942 is about when the court said that which the federal government subsidizes, it has the ability to control. We need to go back into that. We need to change it. We need to get the federal government out of our state's business, and we need to start taking over our rights again, and it will maybe take a major turnover, and I think we see that wave for 2010.
All right. How many people are kind of impressed with the information. Now, I'm changing this next question because I realize I think I know how you're going to answer it. So we're going to do our little yes or no deal, and then I'm going to have you explain how in the world you'd ever do it politically. You willing to opt out of Obamacare if we can make a 10th Amendment argument? Yes or no?
Amen, yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.